Happy October! Happy spooky season! I know it's been a while since we talked about Castlevania since I did that last big 40-minute plus review for the big finale of Season 4 and the entire series overall. But now that I'm caught up with mostly everything else, it's time to get back to business. And I think for this Castlevania, I'm going to make it a little easier on myself and just make each of these reviews 4 episodes apiece. Not only does that give you enough content for longer videos, but also because it makes it easier on me, because instead of having to do individual reviews, I can just do them in sections of 4, because both of these seasons of this new second series of Castlevania are 8 episodes long. They're both the same amount, so that means it's just going to be like 4 reviews having 4 episodes each, rather than, individual episodes like I did for the other Castlevania. And it's not because I think this show is bad or anything, in fact, far from it. I actually really like it so far. It's more so because it's just been a really busy schedule with October, and I had to cut down somewhere. So, for this review, we are going to be taking a look at the first 4 episodes of Castlevania Nocturne, and then we'll go from there. So, what's up? What's happening? What's going on? Everybody, welcome back to Animation Station. This is your friend and everything animation, including a Belmont trying to defend his family name as well as TV and movies. I am your host, Jackson Small. Welcome back to Castlevania-Thon Act 2. After a bit of another unexpected hiatus because of other things. Today, we are taking a look at the first 4 episodes of Castlevania Nocturne, starting with Episode 1, A Common Enemy and Evil. And I'm not going to be super in-depth because I'm talking about 4 episodes apiece. I'm just going to try to hit the biggest highlights. So, let's not waste any time and get straight to it, starting with Episode 1. It starts in Boston, Massachusetts, with Julia Belmont taking her son Richter Belmont, who is one of the main characters of the show, through the city at night to a boat, because they're trying to escape something. But she ends up having to fight the vampire Olrox while she keeps trying to tell her son to get to the boat. But he won't, because he wants to defend the Belmont name and fight vampires. Which, I mean, is a little bit confusing later, because we also find out that they have no idea what night creatures are. I don't know. A bit of a weird clash there, but good enough. And Julia does put up a decent fight against Olrox, until Richter gets in the way and throws off her concentration, because she also has to defend her son, which is what leads Olrox to killing Julia. And unfortunately, even for this show, her death's not that brutal. Unfortunately. But, I mean, she seemed like a decent character for, like, the one scene we got her in. And it's also a good introduction to Olrox and showing how powerful he is. Not to mention, this is the first on-screen death of a Belmont in this entire franchise. Because, as great as the other Castlevania was, the original series, it never showed a Belmont dying off screen, and even when they started playing with the idea with the finale of Season 4, it just ended up just being a fake out, and Trevor lived through it anyway. Somehow. Infinite Corridor bullcrap. Go watch that review if you want my whole spiel on that. But, yeah, it's the first on-screen death of a Belmont in the entire animated series, meaning that the stakes are higher now. Richter could possibly die at any given time. Which, I mean, we know he won't, because he's literally the poster child of this show, but at the same time, it leaves you in that suspense, and it does a good job doing that. Not to mention, we also figure out that this takes place many, many years after the original, so Trevor and Sypha have already passed on, as well as some of their descendants as well. Anyway, after witnessing his mother dying and Olrox sparing him, for his own reasons, Richter flees onto the ship as he's told, grabbing the Morningstar whip on his way out. Then we fast forward to 1792 in the Vendée, in Western France. I'm going to mispronounce a lot of this because I don't speak French. Sorry. 9 years had passed since then, and now Richter Belmont is an accomplished vampire hunter who lives with his Aunt Tara and her daughter Maria. he's also part of the French revolutionaries who stand up to the church, and the rich, very high places where vampires hide. Yeah, vampires are high society in this particular part of the world in this timeline. She encourages them to stand up and fight, as in Maria, because she's the leader of these, just as the Americans in the New World had. And then the meeting's interrupted by vampires. They all fight. And she believes that all the vampires are gathering at the chateau, Maria. And it's also shown that Maria has familiars because she has speaker magic. Because of course she does. Then the meeting concludes, and Richter suggests that they talk to this abbot. But Maria really doesn't want to because the church and the abbot are no friends to the revolutionaries. But surprisingly, they were actually able to talk to the abbot, and while Maria did use some of her spite in some of her dialogue, the abbot did agree to help. But we're going to find out later that's just a ploy and a whole lot of bullshit, but that's how that is for now. Then we have fellow rebel Jack, however you pronounce that, leaves a pub drunk and then is immediately attacked by a vampire. And then he's brought to the chateau where numerous vampires are being harbored by the Marquis. And the Marquis is also a vampire himself. The Marquis and his wife drain Jacques of all his blood and leave his corpse in a pile of numerous bodies, which we're going to find out later is going to be used as material to make more night creatures. No, it doesn't mean that Hector's in the show, unfortunately. At least, not yet. But if he does come back, great. If not, bummer. But at least we get to see more night creatures. So then, at Tara's house, Maria eats dinner and discusses their meeting, and Tara believes that the abbot is a good person. You know, not knowing he's a two-timing piece of shit, but she'll find out eventually. Richter then falls asleep and has a nightmare, and then Maria wakes him up, and then she talks about how the rebels were listening, and Richter claims that he wasn't. Because he's a Belmont, and all Belmonts are assholes. He only hunts vampires because it's fun, and he makes light of the idea of fighting evil. Richter clarifies that he will always stand by Maria and Tara regardless of whether he shares their beliefs or not, because they're family. In a way. And then that's when they are interrupted by sudden appearance of night creatures on their doorstep. And they have no clue what these monsters are, as they engage them in battle. And they're unfamiliar with their movements and their abilities, so all of them begin to struggle, and Maria ends up losing one of her bird familiars. And what's a throwaway scene now is going to end up becoming an important scene later. However, before they're completely overcome and killed, two strangers arrive to save them, those being Annette and Edward, which are a duo from the Caribbean Sea. And they explain that they've come in search of a Belmont to deal with the vampire messiah. And then the episode ends in Nantes, France, however you pronounce that, where Ulrox arrives via ship to a fellow vampire named Vablanc, who wears robes bearing the same insignia as those who had attacked Richter's group, signaling that there is a connection. Then Ulrox thanks Vablanc for meeting him, but says he can find his own way. He walks off and tells him to inform the vampire messiah that he has arrived. And that's the episode. It's a great pilot. It definitely does a good job giving you intrigue, but at the same time, it does still have some of the issues of the previous Castlevania. However, I will say that it does avoid the problem of having clunky, shitty exposition. So, progress. Final thoughts on episode 1. It's a surprisingly great pilot taking place many years after the original that introduces Richter Belmont, begins to set up a refreshingly unique story that's not just a ripoff of the same story again from the original Castlevania series, continues the great gore from the previous incarnation when you see the night creatures and vampires and other stuff. The first on-screen Belmont death in the franchise, which escalates the stakes, and an ending that's actually a solid cliffhanger that left me interested in what was going to happen next. It actually feels like they listened to the criticism and are doing a lot better with delivering exposition rather than the usual shitty, clunky monotony. It's an excellent start. Let's see where it goes. Final verdict for episode 1. is an 8 out of 10. Let's move on to episode 2. Okay, let's talk about episode 2 now, Horror Beyond Nightmares, which is another really good episode, right? Really good? Yeah, it's another really good episode. It's not quite as great as the pilot, but it still has some really good things about it, and it is far from bad. Like, I'm actually entertained by this show so far. Which, if you saw my rants on Castlevania Season 3 and the first half of Season 4, you'd know that that's actually a good thing. Okay, so, not wasting any more time. The episode starts in Paris in 1792 with revolutionaries that are executed in the rain as Abbot Emmanuel preaches to the church. He claims the Messiah is coming to deliver France from the godless mob that threatens to overthrow their society, i.e. the vampire Messiah. Yeah, I'm just going to spoil the twist now since I'm doing all 4 of these episodes in one giant review. That's when a vampire and her escorts ride into the city, are greeted by guards who demand to know their reason for entry, and a dark-skinned vampire woman disembarks her carriage and introduces herself as a representative of the vampire Messiah. Primary guard tells her all religious organizations must be registered, but she clarifies that she doesn't mean a Catholic Messiah, but the real one. The vampire then pounces on the guards and slays them all in a matter of minutes in a nice bit of bloody, brutal carnage. The vampire's name? Jolta Zuentes, voiced by Alarica Johnson. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I can't pronounce anything for shit. Meanwhile, at Tara's house, Maria ends up mourning the loss of one of her familiars, and she's unsure if she should bury it, as her mother comforts her before asking for help for breakfast. Richter then puts the dead night creature in a ditch and burns its body, just to make sure it stays dead. And Maria tells Annette and Edward that she knows about the revolution in the Caribbean Islands. Sorry, I can't talk today. Apparently, word takes a while to reach France, but Maria had heard that the slaves have had an uprising where they burned the plantation to the ground and killed all the slave owners. Annette clarifies that many colonists were vampires, and one vampire slave owner escaped. Yeah, this show deals with the slavery of the time period. And they don't skimp any of the details on it either. It's pretty brutal. But it actually shows the show using its adult themes for artistic reasons rather than just exploitation. So, don't worry. You're not getting some weird, fucked up threesome this time. Then Edward commends Tara's food. And Richter can relate to the struggle of only being able to eat rations and tells them that he spent 3 weeks on the ship as a boy, the worst time of his entire life. Which is all we're going to get about it in this episode, but I feel like before the end of the season, or maybe the start of Season 2, we're going to see more of that. Then Richter asks Annette and Edward if they know about the vampire Messiah, and Annette reveals that her priestess teacher warned her about a Messiah and told her to find a Belmont to help stop them. And then she further explains how vampires have coiled themselves around the nobility of the old world, showing how much they have evolved since the original Castlevania. The Messiah promises to keep these mortals in power with vampires pulling the strings. However, for it to take effect, they must crush the French Revolution. Then Annette asks Richter if he can use magic, as she was told, but he reveals he hasn't been able to do it since childhood. Probably out of still mourning his mom and not wanting to use that magic to, bring back those old wounds. Which is why he only fights with his whip so far in this show. And that's when Annette reveals the name of the vampire Messiah is Countess Erzsébet Bathory, someone who terrorized Tara in the past. And Tara, overcome with her own trauma, has to leave the group for a moment and walks into the woods. Then, meanwhile at the chateau, the vampires congregate to choose a proper sacrifice for their Messiah. Well, that's all that going on. Then Maria and the others find Tara in the woods, and she tells them of the past, and how she was a clan of speakers that was destroyed by vampires in Russia. And Tara's sister was captured by the Countess and turned into a vampire, made to suffer for all eternity hanging from chains, unable to drink blood. Because that's the Countess's whole thing. She thrives on torture. Tara attempted to rescue her sister, but she was forced to kill her and flee after discovering her own fate. Yeah, Tara had to kill her own sister because of the vampirism, and to try to escape the same fate as her. Like, it's some pretty intense shit. Like, that's what I like about this show so far. The characters are all three-dimensional, multi-layered. And so far, we don't have any fucking Saint-Germain clones in this either. Thank God. Okay, and then Richter assures her that there are things he doesn't talk about either. Namely, of course, the death of his mom and how the vampire that killed her still haunts his own nightmares to this day. Annette swears that they'll defeat the Countess before they destroy the revolution. And then angry, Richter walks off and agrees that they will kill her. And then later that day, Maria does bury her familiar, and Edward, because he was an opera singer before he joined the revolution, he sings for both it and Tara's fallen sister. And the song is beautiful. Like, it's absolutely beautiful. I can't even put it into words or even try to describe it to you. You need to hear it for yourself. Like, whoever's voicing Edward, who's voicing Edward? Sidney James Harcourt. You, sir, have an incredible voice. So, yeah, they have a funeral for the familiar, and Edward sings a pretty amazing song. Afterwards, Annette learns from Richter that the vampires are gathering at the chateau and suggests that they do reconnaissance. Tara thinks they should wait, but Richter agrees and tells her to stay behind. On the way to Chateau, the group talks about Otherworld and how all humans descend from gods. You know, the show being philosophical as per usual. I can't talk. Fuck. Annette, in particular, descends from Ogun, the god of iron and war, which explains why she has weird powers. Yeah, that's pretty much all the explanation we get. She's a descendant of a god that gives her powers of iron, and being able to manipulate things. Minerals. That's what it is. Mineral magic. Then Richter claims he doesn't need magic because Belmonts have hunted vampires for years with just the vampire-killing whip. You know, the Morning Star whip, the iconic whip. Which, I mean, isn't entirely right, but Richter being Richter, and seeing how he was shipped off very quickly, probably didn't get the full experience of the Belmont hold in its history. So I wouldn't be surprised if Alucard ends up coming back in this show to tell him more about his own heritage. That'd be a pretty cool way to do it, and it'd be a cool way to have at least one legacy character in the show, since, well, at this point, Trevor and Sypha passed away from old age, so they ain't coming back. Anyway, moving on. He mentions that many of them, including his mom, could use magic, but claims it is not essential. Annette then asks about Richter's mom, and he admits that she died because some vampires can also use magic. Again, showing how much the stakes have escalated since the original series, because now even vampires can use magic. Annette creates a bridge to get everyone across the water, where they sneak into the property of Chateau. They find the Marquis working with other vampires to turn corpses into night creatures, as I discussed in the previous episode review. Maria recognizes that Jacques is among the corpses, and Annette notices the slave owners who got away. The Comte de Valblanc, I think that's how you pronounce that, is also among them. And that's when she loses her composure and reveals their position, which forces them to run away with superior numbers after trying to get into a little bit of a fight. But as they're running away, right in front of her eyes, Edward's killed. Yeah, they actually killed one of the main 4 characters in the 2nd episode of the 1st season. Like, I was expecting him to stick around a little longer, but damn, but that took me by surprise, that they actually killed off one of them so early. Annette immediately breaks down and cries at the loss of her friend, which, as we're going to find out in episode 3, is because the two of them had a very tight-knit relationship. I wouldn't really say they were lovers per se, but they were very close friends and comrades in arms, so you can understand her sorrow. Edward's body is then put among the corpses that are to be turned into night creatures by the Marquis and his wife, who are now the new Devil Forge Masters. They're brought to the Abbey and transformed using a machine that acts as the tool. Again, showing how much the show and certain techniques and stuff have evolved. Edward is transformed into a night creature, a pretty fucking creepy one at that, as Olrox looks on and points out the irony of giving glory to God. And that's the end of the episode. It's another really good watch that has a surprising character death, a beautiful song, and some really good character moments. So yeah, needless to say, it's a really good episode. Final thoughts so we can move on to episode 3. Another pretty good episode with a genuinely scary introduction to the main antagonist. Some dark secrets like Terra having to kill her own sister are revealed. Edward's brief song is wonderfully morbid. There's more great action, and of course, most horrific of all, Edward's shocking death and rebirth as a night creature, showing that there's zero plot armor and that anyone can die at any time. And man, am I glad that this show doesn't have plot armor for its other characters. Like, we know Richter won't die, he's a Belmont, but at the same time, they make it seem like anyone could die in this show. Which is good, because as much as I love the original Castlevania series, those first 2 seasons, it was kind of predictable who would live and who would die, because Trevor and Sypha did have copious amounts of plot armor. But here, they don't really have that, because, again, they outright killed Edward in the 2nd episode. Pretty damn shocking. Sure, it is slower than the last one, it is definitely slower paced, but it's doing a good job fleshing out the side characters, so I can easily forgive it. I'm still invested. So, final verdict for this episode is a 7 out of 10. Another really good episode, not quite as great as the pilot, but still a really good follow-up with a shocking death at the very end. Alright, that's all I've got. Let's move on to episode 3, Freedom Was Sweeter. Okay, so I really liked episodes 1 and 2 of this show, but holy fuck, episode 3 is amazing. Like, right up there with the best of the original Castlevania. Like, this episode's fantastic in every single way, shape, and form. And there is so much to talk about with it. But, again, I have to try to summarize it because I'm doing 4 episodes in one video. And I want to try to keep all of these from being an hour and a half long, so without further ado, let's talk about Season 1, Episode 3, Freedom Was Sweeter. And to put it in simple terms, this is the Annette and Edward backstory episode. This is when we see her regale the tale of how she escaped slavery, how her mom was killed right in front of her, a nice mirror to Richter, and how she met Edward and how she became part of the revolution and how all the events led up to, you know, her and Edward going to find Richter. So, here we go. Let's talk about it. But first, we have a little bit of extra stuff. Deep in a dark, secluded forest filled with withered trees, several worshippers of the Devourer of Light observe as the newest cult member, Vablanc, is branded as an initiate by Jolta. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Meanwhile, Richter and Annette are outside, grieving about Edward's death from Terra's house. And he approaches Annette and claims they could have done little to retaliate because of the ambush of the night creatures. However, Annette still blames herself for Edward's death, and Terra and Maria approach Annette to console her. Still, Annette claims that Edward was her family after the death of her mother. And this is where we get into the flashbacks, and I'm going to try to make it a little bit summarized as best I can. So, Annette, as a kid, worked in the field crops where a horseback tries to whip her, but Annette's mother protects her, pleading to the man to spare her. That night, Annette is bathed by her mother in a tub at their house, and their mother sings for her. Once Annette is dressed, Vablanc appears from the shadows and accuses Annette's mother, Esther, of harboring secrets from him. Sniffing the place, Vablanc knocks over a few objects in the house, revealing magic scriptures underneath them, taking Esther outside by the throat as Annette watches in terror. And then he proclaims that spells of any kind will not be cast on his plantation. And Vablanc then snaps Esther's neck right in front of Annette, who was watching it with tears in her eyes. Yeah, we have yet another death of a parent figure in front of a child's eyes. Again, this show's holding nothing back. Meanwhile, in the present, Annette starts singing a song that casts a spell to levitate the fragments around her. Richter relates to the loss because, obviously, he lost his own mother, and Annette states that she held her mom's lullabies in her heart and that they were ancestral calls connected to African deities beyond the plantation. Again, showing that her bloodline had some kind of magic heritage in it, to put it lightly. Then, 10 years following her mom's death, Annette ended up to be dragged outside of Vablanc's manor where she was to be branded. But that's when her magical powers awoken, and then Vablanc warned Annette to run. And then she did, she was chased by dogs. However, unlike Attack on Titan, where the dogs absolutely murdered the kid in a horrific way, that was so horrific that not even the anime could show it, this one she actually escapes. That's when she makes it to Saint Dominique, however you pronounce that. Again, I'm not French. And that's where all of them were tracking her scent. And then she sees a light from the doorway, and accompanied by a man singing opera, which is Edward. Annette headed towards it, and seeing the shadows of someone coming from the hallway, she retreats through a door and found Edward performing in front of a live audience. Another great song, because Edward has an amazing voice. He would later tell Annette that, as he looked upon the audience who attended his performance, he claimed he could see the colors of their souls. Annette said that hers was pink, but she thought it was green. Then, as Edward's performance continued, Vablanc tries to sniff out the area, until the dogs start barking, and that's when Edward's forced to stop. And Edward is immediately told by Vablanc that he sought his escaped slave. But he sees the scornful eyes of the entire audience, so he decides to reluctantly wait, not wanting to cause any more of a scene than he already has. Because, he's a rich plantation owner and he can't afford to give himself any incidents. Any public incidents, anyway. Then, afterwards, Annette ends up hiding in Edward's room behind his silk clothing, where she's found, and then he allows Annette to replace her wet clothes with something else. And she chooses a dress from the play The Beggar's Opera, which Edward praises. Then, after Annette puts the dress on, Edward fastens a belt onto her, and then they introduce each other. Then, sometime later, Edward assists Annette in escaping to the mountains, where she's joined by the Maroons, a group of freedom fighters. There, Annette learned to harness her magical power from her mentor, Cecile Fatiman, however you pronounce that. Again, I'm not French. Then, one night by the campfire, Cecile foretells a revolution in France, but their chains of suppression will not be broken. Cecile announces that they'll attack Saint-Dominique and cause it to burn. And the Maroons do this, and amid the chaos, Edward and Annette confront Vablanc inside his room at the manor, who stands defiant to her emancipation desires. They try to attack him, but he easily outmaneuvers them and escapes by transforming into a bat and fleeing into the sky. Like the fucking coward that he is. Then, hours later at the base, Edward has his wounds treated, and he sings for the resistance members. Annette then reports to Cecile about the failed attempt to assassinate Vablanc. However, Cecile has a dark premonition about the vampire Messiah, a greater threat than Vablanc could ever be, and that's when she sends Annette to France, and she brings Edward with her. In the present, Annette holds an earthen bust of Edward's head and reminisces about him. And Richter vows that they will avenge him, as the bust then turns back into earth in her hands. It's a great scene, and it does a good job giving some extra depth to the characters, while also, letting us know a little bit more about Edward and his connection with Annette. Now we go back to the Abbey, where Ulrox is watching from the shadows as Emmanuel's right-hand man, Knight Mizrak, however you pronounce that, practices his swordplay. And that's when Mizrak intercepts Ulrox into a wall with a knife and demands to know why he's there. Ulrox then reverses the position against Mizrak and asks why the Abbey was producing night creatures for the Night Messiah, citing that it contradicts his own faith. Because this is a show that definitely has a lot of contradictions and conflictions about faith. However, Mizrak then turns the table on where'd my line go? On Olrox and forces him against the wall again, citing his own faith belief. And this prompts Olrox to believe that Mizrak's faith has abandoned him, which Mizrak frees Olrox and asks that he states his name. Mizrak states that the consequences of the revolution were that those who didn't commit to the state would be executed. Then Olrox warns Mizrak of Elizabeth Bathory, the vampire messiah, who will eventually turn on their alliance. But of course, Mizrak doesn't believe her. Then after a brief pause, Olrox proposes they continue their conversation at a different location. Before leaving, he ends up stating his name. And I'm just going to spoil it right now because we do see this scene in the next episode. The two of them went off to have sex. Now, we don't actually see them having sex. Again, we don't get the disgusting, fucked up threesome from Castlevania Season 3 in here, thank God. But still, it's the show showing more LGBTQ representation after having an LGBTQ female couple in the last season, in the last show. Anyway, moving on now. Then we go to the Vendee, where Jolta's sitting on a sofa contacting Elizabeth, while the Messiah drinks from a young woman. Jolta informs the devotees are filling the chateau. Marquis is excited to see her, and she'll speak with the Forge Master the next day. However, Elizabeth talks about the dream she had where European leaders bowed before her, and Jolta assures her that all will bow before her, as her dream truly is. Her dream is power, like any vampire. Just like, what's-her-face from the last one. Editing will correct me later, I literally forgot her name because she's such a shitty villain. Then Maria introduces Annette to the other revolutionaries, and Annette gives them a motivational speech, while Abbot Emmanuel ends up giving his own to his priory. As the shrieks of night creatures are heard, the Abbot Emmanuel calms the people in his church and tells them that all will be fine as God's on their side. In other words, the Alliance will not allow them to be killed, while Mizrak stands close by. Several night creatures then surround the heroes, and the other night creatures, one of which is Edward, is also now a night creature. They fight against Annette, Maria, and Richter, and when Annette is endangered by one of them, Edward kills its fellow night creature by slicing it in half, causing a winged night creature to bring him back to the Abbey. Then Richter, perplexed at obviously what has happened, runs over to Annette, and Annette claims that the night creature is in fact Edward. She could tell it in his eyes. And this encounter with Edward left Annette distraught and tearful, seeing her comrade had been transformed into a night creature. And that's the end of the episode. It's another really good watch, man. Like, excellent episode. The flashback does a great job fleshing out more of the characters. Again, this show's holding back nothing at all, using its adult themes artistically rather than exploitative. And the writing is some of the best in the entire franchise, so yeah. It's a pretty freaking amazing episode, man. I don't really know what else there is left to say, so let's move on to my final thoughts so we can move on to episode 4. Probably my favorite episode so far, with a delve into Annette's backstory, how she saw her mother murdered right in front of her, and how she met Edward, who brought her into the revolution. It really shows the cruelty of the slavery that took place back in the time period the show is set in, and it does a great job making you feel sympathy for the characters that go through it. I also really appreciate how Richter is the main character, but he's actually pretty subdued so far, which is a great contrast to Trevor. Like, don't get me wrong, Trevor is an awesome, awesome guy. He's an awesome character, one of my, if not my absolute favorite in the entire original show. You know, outside of Alucard. But Trevor was pretty much the main character from the very beginning of the series. Like, sure, it began with a flashback about Dracula, but from then on, it was the Trevor show. Trevor was the main star. He was the main focus of the hero plot. Whereas with here in Nocturne, we got a backstory with Richter in the first episode, and then in the rest of these episodes so far, he's been more of a background character. He's been allowing the other characters to have the spotlight, which is cool. And again, it's not like we're not going to get any more fleshing out from Richter. We're definitely going to get more, especially after what you're going to see ends episode 4. But at the same time, it's nice. It shows that this show actually has priority in its side characters just as much as it does in its titular Belmont. So, it's a great change. Another great change that helps this show set itself apart from Castlevania, the original anime. Added another great battle, more excellent vocal music, and Edward's undead night creature form revealing itself to Annette while also saving her from its own kin. And you've got an excellent episode. I don't really know what else there is to say. Final verdict for this episode is a high and well-deserved 9 out of 10. It's kick-ass. I'm fully hooked in now. Let's see what happens in episode 4, titled Horrors Rising from the Earth. The halfway point of the first season, and it's somehow even better than the last episode. I wouldn't be surprised, as a matter of fact, if it ends up in my favorite episodes of Castlevania overall, right up there with the best of the original Castlevania, because this episode, for lack of a better term, is bad ass for multiple different reasons. So, for this one, because a lot happens in it, and because this is the final review of this bunch, I think I can allow myself a little bit of indulgence and go into the full plot this time, rather than trying to summarize it. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Episode 4, the halfway point of Season 1 of Castlevania Nocturne, Horrors Rising from the Earth. Deep within the basement of the Abbey, Edward is bolted to a table where a three-headed creature is going to dissect him. But that's when Abbot Emmanuel stops it. Emmanuel tries to reason with Edward that he must obey him as it's his new purpose after becoming a night creature, and then asks if the girl he protected has magical influence over him. He then wonders if there was a flaw in his creation. He takes the sword out of his sheath, and Abbot Emmanuel shows Edward the reflection of his eyes and proclaims that this is who he is now. As the creature yells out in fear. Pretty effective. At Terra's house, the group discusses the Forge Master being at the Abbey and the Abbot's involvement with him. A debate between Terra and Maria occurs about the culpability that the Abbot is in cahoots with the vampires, which we find out that he is, but we'll get there when we get there. As this went on, Annette sat by the windowsill looking out the window, and Richter approached her to try to reason with her about Edward possibly being a night creature. This then sparks a debate between Annette and Richter on whether or not they should have saved Edward and how. Like, there's a bunch of different conflictions going on between the characters. Ultimately, Richter laments that they lack a plan and suggests someone propose one, and Maria tells Richter that they're all scared. However, Richter claims that the only time he was afraid was when he was 10, and Annette claims it was when his mother died at the hands of a vampire. Revealing her fate to the others. Richter then claims that whenever he proposes a plan should be made, he's called a coward, which Maria argues that he's not. Annette then chimes in, stating they're just inexperienced, and Terra proposes entering the Abbey through a hidden passageway to find out for sure if the Abbot is actually in cahoots with the vampires. However, in Mizrak's bedroom, because as I stated in the last episode review, these two went on to have sex, it's not even hinted at or applied. It's outright shown because both of them are naked. No, you don't see any man parts, but still, the rest of them is completely naked. Mizrak and Olrox lay in bed after spending the night together. After Mizrak gets out of bed and prepares to get himself dressed, Olrox asks if the Messiah knows that the Abbot is a Forge Master. Mizrak answers yes, and Olrox concludes that the Abbot intends to use his night creatures against the Messiah. Despite Olrox's reasoning, Mizrak dismisses it. Sorry, I'm having a little bit difficulty with this pronunciation. And Olrox insists that once the Abbot and Messiah's goals are complete, they turn on each other, and the Messiah will stand on top. Questioning if this is what Mizrak truly wants, Mizrak insists that it is, and he finishes getting himself dressed. He finishes his conversation with Olrox and heads to the church, where Jolta arrives with the Marquis and devotees lining the pathway. Meanwhile, in Machkol, I think that's how you pronounce it, Tara activates a hidden pulse switch leading to the Abbey cellar. At the Abbey, the Marquis introduces the Abbot to Jolta, and Jolta trades insults toward the Abbot as Mizrak, who was also standing there, chimes in occasionally. Tara's group below follows the dark, narrow pathway into the Abbey and briefly talks about Edward. Returning to the Abbot's side, Jolta mentions that the Marquis had provided the Abbot with a sundry of dead bodies for him to work with and asks how many will be prepared. The Abbot claims that 18 are ready and more soon will be available, showing that there is still deficiency in this new technology despite it being an advanced version of the Forge Mastery that we saw in the previous show with Hector and Isaac. Again, showing how this show, because it takes place further in time, has evolved in its technology, even for the villains. But Jolta expects far more than that and asks how long it'll take. However, the Abbot avoids the question and insists that he will live up to their side of the bargain, and Mizrak claims they expect the Messiah to be Joan of Arc. Hearing that pleases Jolta, and she asks to see the machine itself. With the Abbot's permission, Mizrak leads the way. From his cell, Edward is visited by Olrox, who states that what tragedy made him a night creature, and cites the smell of pain, regret, and despair coming from him. And that's also shown in his character design, as it's literally another pair of hands over his eyes. Like, it's a really damn cool design. Whoever did that, props to you. You made a pretty damn cool demon creature. Edward answers that he doesn't know his name or what exactly he is, but all he wants is his freedom, which Olrox agrees with. Because since Edward's now a night creature, he can't remember anything about himself because, well, the past self died. His past self died, so his soul was brought back, but none of the memory, none of the stuff in his head. Meanwhile, on Tara's side, she warns the group about what they witness and encounter as they progress. Richard touts his family history as a Belmont. Sorry, not Richard, Richter. Tara then hits a switch on the wall, revealing a doorway, passing through it. Annette, I'm just going to call her Annette. Annette hears Edward singing in Italian, because even though he doesn't have his memory, he still has his voice. She immediately heads onward towards the sound's origin and pins a night creature on the way as Olrox stands in front of the machine and investigates the book on the nearby table. As Annette fights off more night creatures and is soon joined by Marie and Richter, the group is confronted by the Abbot's group, which shocks Tara and the Abbot for different reasons. So Tara finds out that the Abbot is a backstabbing piece of shit. Annette and Maria fight against Jolta, who easily outmatches them, so Tara uses her magic to allow Annette to reunite with Edward. And Maria does actually take some injury here, taking a deep claw gash on her arm. As the fight between Jolta against Maria and Tara continues, and Edward's still singing in the background, Jolta slashes Maria's right arm open with her claws, as stated before. However, before she can land another blow, the Abbot stops her and notes that Maria is just a child. I don't know how that would have stopped Jolta before, but whatever. Elsewhere, Richter, who had a night creature at his mercy, is now attacked by the Marquis. On Annette's side, she apologizes to Edward, who slowly begins to regain his memories. Tearfully, Annette promises to end Edward's suffering, but Edward, backing away in shock, made Annette regret this, because she had believed that's what he wanted. He wanted to be, put to bed, rest in peace. But turned out she was wrong, because Edward does not remember anything about himself. Her time with Edward is interrupted after Jolta decides to attack her. And then Richter kills the Marquis in a pretty badass way by throwing 1,000,000 knives into it, stabbing it multiple times, and then cutting its fucking head off. It's awesome. It's an awesome death. You just gotta see it for yourself. It's my favorite kill on the show so far. He directs his attention towards the Abbot, who has Mizrak by his side. Tara and Maria stand beside Richter, and Tara asks shocked what his motives are for aligning himself with the vampires. To his confession, he claims the kingdom of God is in danger and he must protect it. I don't know how teaming up with literal demons from hell is going to protect his kingdom, but whatever. Scared people do really stupid shit, as seen very clearly in stuff such as this. Like, I can think of no clearer example of people doing dumb shit out of fear. Is this. Sorry, I got off topic there, but that's the first thing that comes to my head when I think about that. Richter suggests killing him as an alternative, but that's when Olrox appears behind him, for the first time in years. And he literally taunts him, saying he's all grown up, which causes Richter to lose his nerve, drop his whip, and run. Following Richter, everyone retreats, and Annette vows to return for Edward later. Once Tara's group is gone, Olrox picks up the Marquis's head, claiming he was just an opportunist who followed the Messiah because she was powerful. Looking at Drolta, Olrox introduces himself and claimed that the Messiah was expecting him. Drolta remembers him as the Aztec as Olrox walks away, and the Forge Master book is seen as in his possession, hinting that he's probably also someone with the power to be a Forge Master, which explains how he was able to kill Julia. Outside, Tara, Maria, and an upset Annette escape the Abbey without Richter, because Richter had continued running even after getting out of the actual Abbey. Let me see if I can find the quote. Like, seriously, Richter says a really damn cool line as he kills the one vampire. Oh, they're not gonna show it? Damn it. It's such a cool line. Like, seriously, look it up. The line's really cool. And the way that Richter kills off the Marquis is badass as hell. It's his first badass vampire kill in the show. So, yeah, that's Horrors Rising from the Earth. It has an amazing cliffhanger with Richter losing all his nerve and will to fight. We have some nice bloody brutal carnage as night creatures and the Marquis are slaughtered. We get more about Edward and showing how night creatures lose their memory after they're resurrected. And more about Annette and Tara and how they all feel betrayed about the Abbey. So, in other words, the Abbot is a piece of shit, and I hope he dies, along with the rest of the antagonists. Overall, this episode is an amazing halfway point for this introductory season of the series. The reveal of the Abbot's treachery, the best fight of the season so far, scored to another incredible Edward song. High tension, Richter's first badass moment of the season as he slaughters the villain's lackey, the Marquis, brutally, and the grim ending as he runs away in fear after being confronted by his mother's killer. Hell, there's even more great LGBTQ representation present, just like in the original show. I literally have zero qualms here. This is an absolutely phenomenal episode that now has me thoroughly hooked into this show. I can't wait to see what the second half has in store when it unfolds. But that's going to do it for this review. Final verdict for this episode, this final episode we're looking at for now, is an 11 out of 10. It's kick-ass, it's awesome, check it out if you haven't seen it. And so far, I'm having a great time watching Nocturne. It's like rewatching Castlevania Season 1 and 2 again. Like, it's awesome. It's been a great season so far. And I can't wait to see how the second half unfolds and how it leads into Season 2. And even more interestingly, Season 2 is a 2025 show, so that'll be even more interesting, because I'll be caught up on another series. But, like I said, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this almost every single day. Feel free to hit the hype button if you so desire to get this higher up in the algorithm. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on all 4 of these episodes and Nocturne in general in the comments down below. And let me know if you are a fan of me going with this new 4 episodes apiece format, or if you want me to return it back to the normal 1 episode apiece format. Let me know it all in the comments. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jack Small of Animation Station, and I will see you in a few days when we finish off the second half of Castlevania Nocturne Season 1. Take care.